What compels a wealthy heir who possesses everything to trade silk doublets and ancestral estates for the salty spray and the scent of gunpowder? For Thomas Cavendish, an aristocrat to his very core, the answer was humiliatingly simple: desperation. This young nobleman inherited a vast fortune and squandered it away on lavish attire, extravagant feasts, and the empty entertainments of the Queen's court. By the age of 25, he was on the brink of utter ruin and disgrace. Debts mounted, and creditors relentlessly knocked at his door. Only two paths remained: rot in a debtor's prison or gamble the last thing he owned, his own life. He chose the ocean not for the pursuit of glory, as newspapers later claimed, but because plundering Spanish galleons was his sole, desperate chance to avoid dying a pauper. Yet this cynicism was not innate. He had grown up in the shadow of an immense fortune that came into his hands far too soon. His father died when Thomas was only 12, leaving the boy alone with his wealth, but without a single word of guidance on how to manage it. He perceived the world of courtiers as a grand game where respect was the stake and gold was the currency, and he bet everything. He bought the swiftest horses, commissioned the most expensive doublets, and hosted the most extravagant feasts, believing he was securing his place in the sun. Then the money ran out. In an instant, all his friends vanished, and the fawning smiles of sycophants morphed into the contemptuous sneers of creditors. It was then, in the silence of his deserted estate, that he realized the rules of this world were a lie. Honor, dignity, loyalty, all were merely a facade for greed. He resolved never again to play by others' rules. He would forge his own, and he was not alone. 16th century England itself was like a desperate aristocrat on the verge of bankruptcy, an island nation hemmed in by enemies with an empty treasury and a hungry populace. On the other side of the map lay Spain, a colossus whose holds were bursting with New World gold. To wage open war against it would have been suicidal. So Queen Elizabeth, a brilliant intriguer, devised a devilish scheme. She tacitly sanctioned anyone who dared, at their own risk, to plunder the Spanish. Officially, this was piracy, punishable by the gallows, but if you brought your spoils to an English port, shared them with the crown, and sank enemy ships, you became a national hero. Yesterday's bankrupt and debtor could today become richer than the king. The ocean transformed into a vast casino, where life was the stake and entire fortunes were the winnings. Cavendish made his gamble. At 26, with 3 tiny vessels, he embarked on a circumnavigation, not for discovery, but for money. He burst into the Pacific Ocean, which the Spanish considered their private lake, and unleashed a bloodbath there. Town after town he plundered and razed to the ground, leaving no stone unturned. Churches, warehouses, homes, everything turned to ashes. He engaged in no negotiations and took no prisoners. This was not war, it was utter destruction. But his true objective was the mythical Great Galleon, the Santa Ana, a treasure ship that sailed once a year from Manila to Acapulco. Cavendish ambushed it off the coast of Mexico. After a ferocious struggle, he boarded this floating stronghold laden with Chinese silk, spices, and, most importantly, gold. It was the largest single haul ever taken by one man. Yesterday's bankrupt had become the richest pirate in history. This triumph, however, was built not on maritime talent, but on ingenious manipulation. Cavendish didn't seek loyal sailors, he recruited shareholders for the riskiest venture in the world. He frequented portside taverns, where he found men with nothing to lose, promising them neither glory nor honor. He promised them shares. Everyone, from cabin boy to boatswain, became an investor. Their pay not a handful of coins, but a percentage of the plunder. This simple scheme transformed a rabble of cutthroats into a pack of predators, each fighting not for their captain but for their own purse. He spent his last shillings not on supplies but on his own image. He wore velvet and drank from silver in plain sight, creating a living advertisement of the life that awaited them at the end of their journey. He didn't inspire them, he simply awakened their greed, pointed them towards their goal, and unleashed them. But this pack of predators was not hunting in a vacuum. Behind Cavendish's audacious plan lay a shadow more potent than any crown. Sir Francis Walsingham, Europe's foremost spy. It was he, the Queen's spider, who transformed piracy into an instrument of grand policy. Walsingham supplied Cavendish with maps, leaked intelligence on galleon movements, and guaranteed that any judge who dared to touch him would end up in the Tower. Yet this game had a second player, Lord Burghley, the Lord High Treasurer. A pragmatist to his core, he saw Cavendish not as a hero, but as a madman who would drag England into a war capable of destroying it. While Cavendish was cutting Spanish throats in the Pacific, Burghley was meticulously building a dossier demanding his head. Every burned town was a trump card for Walsingham, but also irrefutable evidence for Burghley. Cavendish's fate was being sealed not at sea, but in the quiet offices of London. And he returned. He sailed into the Thames like a conqueror, with sails of damask silk and holds brimming with gold. London went wild. For a time, Burghley was silenced. His arguments were powerless before such a triumph. But Cavendish committed the fatal flaw of the victor. He believed his own legend. He thought he had caught fortune by the tail and immediately gambled away all his winnings, assembling a new, even grander expedition. But the ocean does not forgive hubris. This time, everything went wrong. Ships were lost in storms, the promised gold never materialized, and instead came hunger and disease. Then his ingenious system, built on greed, backfired on him. His shareholders realized they had been cheated. Yesterday's comrades transformed into a wolf pack. They mutinied and abandoned him. The richest pirate in history died at 29 in the middle of the ocean, not from an enemy bullet, but from hunger and despair aboard a rotting vessel, betrayed by the very men he had taught to value only gold. And those who betrayed him, they faced not a share of treasures, but a slow demise. Of the hundreds of sailors who abandoned their captain, only a handful returned home, ragged and broken. The rest perished in storms, succumbed to scurvy, or were killed on the hostile shores of Patagonia. Their mutiny brought them not a single shilling. No treasures remained either. Cavendish had invested all the Santa Anna's gold into his second, disastrous expedition. He left no inheritance, only massive debts. His family once again found themselves on the brink of ruin, the very fate he had so desperately tried to escape. This became the final nail in the coffin of the entire system. Lord Burghley had irrefutable evidence. Privateering was a lottery that bankrupted the treasury. After Cavendish's failure, the crown tightened its grip. The era when any adventurer could acquire a license for plunder was drawing to a close. So what was the net result? Not gold, it evaporated. Not glory, it proved ephemeral. And certainly not great discoveries. Only history remained, a pristine, diamond-clear example of human tragedy. Cavendish was neither a master mariner nor a brilliant strategist. He was a gambler who staked his life, hit the jackpot, and then squandered it all because he couldn't stop in time. And therein lies his main paradox. He pursued the most scorned of metals to escape the shame of poverty, yet ultimately became a legend, not through his triumph, but through his spectacular ruin. He sought to secure his place in the world of the living, but instead achieved immortality in the realm of myths.